That day, Eriri asked Utaha about the script she wrote, wondering why she changed the number of girls in the pool from 2 to 5. Utaha explained that after visiting the location, she got a lot of new ideas. Eriri scolded Utaha for making such a drastic change on a whim because it meant additional illustrations as a consequence. Utaha then pointed out that Eriri hadn't even drawn anything yet and that she was aware Eriri's drawing schedule was slightly behind. Eriri blamed it on Utaha's messy concept. Utaha argued that her concept was clearly written down and even included a detailed description of the swimsuit worn by Kareri, the blonde-haired protagonist. However, Eriri protested that describing her as scrawny, flat-chested, and wearing padded swimwear was just wrong. Utaha merely described what she had in mind, but Eriri insisted that the body shape should have been decided when they discussed the character design. Eriri was also confused about why Hibaragoka's waist suddenly became slimmer when it was originally supposed to be wide as per Eriri's design. Utaha simply said she didn't recall ever approving such a design. Eriri argued that design rights belonged to the illustrator, and she wouldn't let an ordinary writer interfere with her work. Meanwhile, Megumi and Tomoya just watched Eriri and Utaha bickering. Megumi commented that since Utaha's script was already being worked on and Eriri's illustrations weren't too late, they were still on schedule. Megumi wondered why Utaha and Eriri always fought whenever they met. Tomoya explained that the two of them had known each other before he recruited them, and had been arguing since the beginning. Megumi then practiced dialogue with Tomoya, but when Megumi read the protagonist's line calling him deaf and dumb, Tomoya got annoyed. A year ago in the library, Utaha saw that her light novel was available on the shelf and immediately knew it was because of Tomoya. As she walked down the school hallway alone, Eriri suddenly called out to her. Surprisingly, Utaha recognized Eriri's name. Eriri felt honored that Utaha knew who she was and referred to her as the long-haired Ice Queen. Utaha admitted that she didn't like being called such a weird nickname. Eriri then advised Utaha not to associate with a junior who was also a nerd, referring to the time she saw Utaha talking with Tomoya on the school rooftop. Utaha dismissed it, saying Eriri must have mistaken her for someone else, but Eriri insisted that they were talking about the book Metronome of Love and was sure she wasn't mistaken. Utaha asked what was so wrong about her hanging out with Tomoya. Eriri said that both Utaha and Tomoya were nerds, and she found it unfortunate that Utaha, the Queen of Light novels, was associating with an idiotic nerd like Tomoya, who could potentially ruin her reputation. Utaha didn't mind being insulted herself, but she refused to let Eriri use her as an excuse to insult Tomoya. This made Eriri angry, and she asked if Utaha liked Tomoya. Utaha didn't care and chose not to answer, walking away instead. Eriri then shouted that Tomoya didn't like Utaha in that way. He only saw her as a friend he could talk to about books. Eriri also mentioned that Tomoya only cared about Metronome of Love, its characters, and its author. That's when Utaha suddenly approached and cornered Eriri. She introduced herself as a second-year student from Class 2D and revealed that her pen name was Yutaka Kasumi. Eriri was completely shocked to learn that Utaha was the author of Metronome of Love. She never saw it coming. That night at home, she was frustrated that the author of Metronome of Love had to be someone at her school. Eriri was so upset that she even forgot to ask for Utaha's autograph earlier that day. Originally, Tomoya had told Eriri about the book by leaving a copy of Metronome of Love in her locker and telling her that it was the best book he had ever read. Eriri read it and found the story incredibly touching. At school, she planned to meet Tomoya on the rooftop, but she was shocked to find him already deep in conversation with Utaha about the book. After what had happened earlier that day, there was no way Eriri would have the courage to ask Utaha, the author of Metronome of Love, for an autograph. That day, Tomoya was at a cafe with Utaha when she suddenly asked him about Eriri. The question caught Tomoya off guard, making him choke on his drink. He quickly asked why Utaha was bringing up Eriri, to which she casually replied that it was nothing. She had just heard that Eriri was a well-known first-year student at school and was curious if Tomoya knew her. Tomoya responded that he didn't really know Eriri that well. They were in different classes, had different hobbies, and even came from different hometowns. Utaha seemed intrigued and mentioned that she had heard Eriri was half British. Tomoya then explained that Spencer was her father's surname, while Sawamura was her mother's. Her father worked at the British Embassy and met her mother while stationed in Japan. Utaha asked what kind of person Eriri really was since she had never heard any bad rumors about her. She also noted that despite coming from an upper-class background, Eriri seemed to get along with everyone. Tomoya, however, dismissed this, saying that Eriri was just putting on an act, Deep down, she was selfish, stubborn, and quite annoying. Hearing Tomoya talk so much about Eryuri, Utaha raised an eyebrow and asked if he actually spoke with her often. Tomoya denied it, saying that Eryuri barely talked to him at school. She had even forbidden him from speaking to her in public, and if there was ever something important, she would just send him a message on his phone. Tomoya sighed, wondering how long she planned to keep acting that way toward him. Suddenly, Utaha started shaking her leg, making the entire table tremble. Tomoya glanced at her and asked if something he said had upset her. Utaha calmly stated that she wasn't angry, but Tomoya called her out, saying that was a lie. In response, Utaha smirked and said that Tomoya was lying to her as well. The next day, Utaha went to the art club room looking for Eryuri. However, one of Eryuri's friends blocked the entrance, preventing her from going inside. The friend even mentioned that the room had practically become Eryuri's private studio, and even as an official club member, she wasn't allowed to enter. Utaha scoffed and asked if Eryuri was getting special treatment just because she was the blonde-haired rich girl. The friend quickly denied it, saying that Eryuri wasn't treated like that at all. She spoke with her fellow first-year students, just like everyone else. Utaha shrugged and said that made sense considering they were all in the same grade, but then pointed out that first-year students should still show more respect to second years like herself. Ignoring the warnings, Utaha forcefully opened the art club room. The friend panicked and tried to stop her, saying that Eryuri wasn't there at the moment, but Utaha didn't care. She locked the door behind her when she was inside. The friend anxiously called out, worried more about getting in trouble with the teachers than about Eryuri. Inside the room, Utaha glanced around and found sheets of paper with Eryuri's illustrations, along with her artist name printed on them. The following morning, Eryuri arrived at school as usual. Many of her friends greeted her, and she responded with her usual friendly demeanor. However, she suddenly heard someone calling her name. She turned to respond and was shocked to see that it was Utaha. Her reaction made her friends stop in their tracks, staring in confusion at the scene. Trying to keep her composure, Eryuri greeted Utaha back. Her friends were puzzled, wondering why Utaha was speaking to Eryuri. Ignoring them, Utaha asked Eryuri if they could have a private chat. She then led Eryuri to the rooftop. Once there, Eryuri frowned and asked why Utaha had gone out of her way to bring her to such a secluded place. Utaha smirked and said that she had visited Eryuri's private studio the day before. Then, without hesitation, she revealed what she had discovered: Eri Kashiwaji, a member of the adult Doujin circle Egoistic Lily. Utaha held up her phone displaying Eryuri's artwork. She casually remarked that Eryuri was a well-known illustrator with a strong following at every event, particularly among male fans aged 17 and up. Eryuri felt embarrassed and asked how Utaha could know about it. Utaha had found the name tag on the picture from the internet the day before. Eryuri then asked what Utaha wanted from her. Eryuri suspected that Utaha might be trying to blackmail her, threatening to keep her identity a secret or perhaps snap her fingers and call her male followers to attack her. It would be impossible for her to fight back, and those male followers would probably grin at her. Utaha asked Eryuri not to compare this situation with the adult comics. Eryuri then wondered if Utaha was going to smirk at her and call her a knave girl. But Utaha actually said that Eryuri could just draw it herself and even called her a creator of cheap adult comics. Eryuri asked why Utaha was searching for her identity. Utaha paused for a moment and asked why Eryuri was hiding her identity. Eryuri replied, saying that wasn't Utaha herself also hiding her identity as a light novel writer. Utaha explained that she never meant to hide it, it's just that no fool would dare talk to her, except for Tomoya. Utaha then asked when Eryuri started drawing. It turned out that Eryuri had been drawing since second grade in grade school and had kept it hidden all this time. Eryuri was tired of being called a maniac, and it was so embarrassing. Utaha pointed out that such thoughts didn't hold any value anymore in their time. Eryuri asked Utaha not to act like she understood what it was like to be teased and laughed at every day. Even the teachers didn't understand. In fact, even her one and only friend had distanced herself from her. Eryuri just wanted to talk about the games and cartoons she loved with a friend. Utaha then gave Eryuri a handkerchief to wipe her tears. Utaha realized that what motivated Eryuri was her unpleasant childhood experience. Utaha said that Eryuri didn't draw to make others happy, but rather, more to seek revenge. Eryuri responded by saying that Utaha didn't write to entertain others because she never truly entertained anyone and basically just looked down on them. Eryuri mentioned that the readers of Utaha's light novels weren't touched out of empathy, but because they had been calculated. She said Utaha only played with people's emotions with her technique. If Utaha thought Eriri's motivation was revenge, that might be true, but Eriri thought that Utaha had no motivation at all, and that was far worse. Eriri was even surprised she had been fooled into liking a writer with no emotions. Utaha then asked if that was Eriri's opinion about Metronome of Love. Utaha said that even if their works were made out of revenge or calculation, if they still managed to touch someone, it meant that they had lost. Eriri got upset and said that Utaha was belittling her readers. But Utaha didn't mean it that way. It turned out that Utaha truly admired the work Eriri created in the art room. Utaha then thanked Eriri for saying that she had played with her readers' emotions using her technique, which in other words was the highest compliment for a writer. Eriri asked if Utaha also played with techniques to flirt with men. Utaha responded by saying that was an accusation from someone who used erotic works to attract men, and it wouldn't affect her at all. Eriri then asked what kind of relationship Utaha had with Tomoya. Utaha asked back what Eriri's relationship with Tomoya was. Eriri said she was Tomoya's childhood friend, but Utaha responded that relationships are defined by time. Not wanting to lose, Eriri then said that love at first sight is easily forgotten. Utaha replied that childhood friends were the typical loser characters in cartoons or games. Eriri said that older female protagonists only appeared in a handful of games. Utaha said that characters with blonde hair from foreign lands were just supporting protagonists. They continued to argue back and forth, neither willing to give in. That was the start of their acquaintance a year ago. That afternoon during a meeting, Tomoya said that they should first focus on the things they had agreed upon and then think about the next steps slowly. Eriri agreed and Utaha said she would think it through at her own pace. Tomoya wrapped up the meeting for the day, but before leaving, he asked Utaha and Eriri to sign a card. Tomoya thought it was a good idea to mark the launch of the game at the Winter Art Festival, as well as to use it as a promotional tool and a symbol of their circle's success. He requested an illustration from Eriri to be placed in the center of the card, with Eriri's signature on the right and Utaha's signature on the left. Tomoya also asked that the character featured in the illustration be Meguri. Eriri asked why she had to draw the illustration. Tomoya explained that it could be used as a promotional item and placed at their booth during the Winter Art Festival. Utaha then asked where the signed cards would be placed before the festival. Tomoya said they would be displayed in a place that they all frequently visited. Utaha guessed that they would probably be placed in Tomoya's own room, and Eriri jokingly asked if this was made for himself. Utaha mentioned that a signed card from Yutaka Kasumi and Eri Kashiwaji could fetch a pretty high price at an online auction. Eriri then replied that it seemed like it was the signature itself that was valuable, and if it were paired with the signature of an unknown writer, it would lose its meaning. Not wanting to back down, Utaha called Eriri an illustrator who hadn't had a professional debut yet. Tomoya explained that those signed cards were treasures to him that he wouldn't sell, as he had wanted them ever since he started the group. To him, the two signatures represented the greatest collaboration. Eriri quickly drew the illustration on the card, and they were all amazed at her skill. Megumi then asked Eriri if she could make one for her as well. It turned out that not only Tomoya wanted the card, but Megumi herself had also longed for Eriri and Utaha's signatures. Eriri didn't mind giving her signature, and Megumi immediately went off to buy the signed cards. Utaha asked Megumi to get an extra card for her, and Eriri also requested one for herself. Megumi quickly left to purchase them. That night, Utaha finished her script. She immediately called Tomoya to let him know that she had completed her part, and reminded him of his promise to spend Saturday with her. Utaha suggested they meet at 9:30 p.m. and asked him not to be late, as she would be waiting for him until he arrived. On Saturday, they met at a bookstore. Tomoya wanted to start a conversation with Utaha, but she told him that she preferred if he didn't talk to her while she was reading. Tomoya asked how long they would be staying there. Utaha requested that they stay until she finished reading the entire series. Tomoya hoped this was just a joke, but the Utaha he knew when she was deeply focused on a book was beyond reason. In other words, she was completely lost in her own world. Utaha asked Tomoya to wait calmly until she finished reading all the books, also pointing out that Tomoya wouldn't want to disturb others in the bookstore. Tomoya replied that the bookstore was there to sell books, not for people to read them for free. Utaha then told him to wait while she bought the books. They left the bookstore with one complete series. Tomoya was surprised at how many books Utaha had bought, especially since it was just the first store they had visited. Utaha explained that she had been too busy writing and hadn't had the time to read. Eriri had been observing Utaha and Tomoya from afar the entire time. Not long after, Megumi showed up to meet Eriri. Eriri complained that Megumi was late, but Megumi explained that just 30 minutes ago, Eriri had suddenly contacted her while she was still in her pajamas. Eriri blamed Megumi for being late, causing her to miss Utaha and Tomoya's departure. Megumi didn't even realize that Eriri had been spying on them. Meanwhile, Utaha and Tomoya went to a cafe and Tomoya congratulated her on finishing her script. Utaha thanked Tomoya, referring to him as a term of endearment. She then asked him to be quiet because she was focused on reading an exciting part of the book. Tomoya was puzzled as to why Utaha was so absorbed in reading, especially since it was she who had asked to go out that day to celebrate her achievement. Utaha explained that her curiosity had overtaken her, surpassing both her appetite and interest in men. Tomoya started to get irritated because Utaha was admitting this with her usual flat expression. Utaha told him she would finish soon and asked Tomoya to eat first. Tomoya began eating and then invited Utaha to watch a movie after she was done reading. Utaha agreed, so Tomoya quickly started picking a movie. Utaha suggested whether there was a lousy live-action film adaptation that would disappoint the fans of the original work. Tomoya said that while there might be such films, he wouldn't mention any titles. Meanwhile, Eriri was frustrated because she had failed to catch up with Tomoya and Utaha. Megumi asked how Eriri knew that Tomoya and Utaha were out together and how Eriri ended up at the same place as them. Eriri explained that she was just out shopping and happened to see them. Megumi seemed skeptical, even mentioning that it was also a coincidence that she had seen them at the Rokutenbo Mall. Eriri realized that Megumi was very perceptive, so she tried to reassure her that it was all just a coincidence. Megumi then mentioned that it seemed like she had seen Tomoya and Utaha in line at the cinema. Eriri complimented Megumi on her clever tactics in stealing attention. It couldn't be underestimated. Eriri quickly ran toward the cinema. After Tomoya and Utaha finished watching the movie, they stopped by a cafe. Utaha commented that although the sequel's TV adaptation had been turned into a movie, it still wasn't great. However, Tomoya thought the new character was sweet and the final scene left a lasting impression on him. Utaha mentioned that the film was impressive because of its character design and acting, even though the script was very cliched. However, the good visuals and interesting performances managed to cover that up. Tomoya, as a fan, felt that instead of criticizing the script, it was better to just praise the characters and acting. For Utaha, that was just praise from fans, which wouldn't help the creators grow. Tomoya responded that even though Utaha said that they were just fans, Utaha didn't care whether it was a joke or anything else. She preferred that the director who was going to produce her script didn't just throw stones and hide his hands. She told Tomoya that he needed to be sharp and brave enough to say if something was good or bad. Tomoya understood that he needed to be sharp, but he didn't quite understand what she meant by brave. Utaha explained that he had to be brave enough to speak his mind without exceptions, even when evaluating her work. Tomoya then asked if that wouldn't make Utaha angry. Utaha replied that there was nothing more valuable than receiving criticism from fans. However, if the criticism was too painful, she probably wouldn't speak to that person again. Meanwhile, Eriri and Megumi were also at the cafe. Eriri was even crying while reading a book. She apologized to Megumi for having to see her like that. Megumi commented that Eriri was someone who easily got emotional. Eriri was crying because she hadn't expected Mariko to be made the female protagonist, as it wasn't like that in the original series. Moreover, Koi, the male protagonist, decided to let go of Yui, the female protagonist in the TV series, leaving Mariko, who had always been by his side since childhood. Eriri felt so relieved that the story didn't end like it did in the TV version. When Tomoya and Utaha left the cafe, Megumi asked if it wasn't better for them to leave too. Unfortunately, Eriri didn't care. She still wanted to continue discussing the story in the book. That night, Tomoya and Utaha ended their outing with a meal at a restaurant after shopping. Utaha commented that Tomoya looked very tired from carrying all her shopping bags. Tomoya mentioned that her purchases should have just been delivered directly, but some of them were things Utaha wanted to read right away, so she decided to take a few home with her. Tomoya congratulated Utaha on finishing her script. Utaha apologized for taking longer than she had promised earlier. Tomoya understood because Utaha still had a novel to work on. Utaha then mentioned that starting from that point, her task was done and maybe she wouldn't be hanging out with Tomoya's circle as often since she needed to focus on finishing her novel. Additionally, she had to start thinking about her future. Utaha wasn't too worried about university because she was sure she would receive invitations. There were 2 universities with programs that suited her, one of which was in the Kansai area. Tomoya asked why Utaha wasn't planning to go to a closer university. Utaha explained that the other university was only a 15-minute train ride away, and she was still considering both options. She asked Tomoya which one he thought she should choose. The Kansai University had a much better program, but it was far from her family and living on her own would be quite a hassle. Still, she was also interested in living freely there. Tomoya thought for a moment and Utaha asked why he looked so worried. Tomoya replied that it wasn't just a simple matter. Meanwhile, Megumi and Eriri were at a clothing store. Megumi was picking out some outfits for Eriri to try on. Eriri immediately went to the fitting room to try on the clothes Megumi had chosen. Megumi really enjoyed picking clothes for Eriri. Eriri asked what exactly they were doing at the store. Megumi explained that they were picking out clothes for Eriri, who had been wearing athletic wear all day. Eriri said they had lost track of Tomoya and Utaha, all wasting time in the store. Megumi tried to explain that it was Eriri's fault for getting caught up talking about books while they were following Tomoya and Utaha at the cafe. However, Eriri didn't want to discuss what had already happened. She just wanted to quickly get back to following Tomoya and Utaha. Megumi asked her to stop, saying that if they kept it up, they would just be stalkers. Eriri didn't understand why Megumi said that and wondered if Megumi didn't realize what they had been doing when they were alone together. If anything were to happen, it would be their circle that would get in trouble. Megumi showed her a message from Utaha telling them not to worry about what happened that day. The next day, Tomoya escorted Utaha to the station. Before they parted ways, Tomoya told Utaha that it would be better if she stayed at her current university instead of moving to Kansai. If Utaha stayed, maybe they could make a game together after she graduated. However, if she didn't want to work with him anymore, that would be a different story. In that case, it might be the last game they made together. Tomoya said he didn't want to be the one to close any doors of opportunity. Utaha didn't expect Tomoya to look so serious. She walked up to him and said she would give him a chance, handing him a script for the final game road. Tomoya replied, asking if that wasn't the same script she had given him earlier. Utaha explained that she had rewritten it, and the new version had different developments and an ending that was different from the one before. She believed this was a possible direction for their game. Utaha wanted Tomoya to choose between the script he had received earlier or the one she was giving him now. She even whispered which path he should choose. Utaha wanted Tomoya to read it and make the decision, because at that moment, Tomoya wasn't just a fan anymore. He was the director. The next day, Megumi and Eriri went to Tomoya's house. They rang the doorbell several times, but Tomoya didn't answer. Megumi wondered if Tomoya wasn't home, even though they had agreed to meet at 10 a.m. Eriri speculated that Tomoya hadn't come home the night before and was probably drinking coffee at a hotel. Megumi said Eriri's imagination was running wild, and she was getting tired of responding to her. Eriri said they needed to get into Tomoya's room to make sure he was there. She tried to find a key, thinking it might be hidden under a pot or a doormat. If their meeting that day was cancelled, it would cause problems for Tomoya. Megumi agreed to go straight to Tomoya's room. She opened the door with a key she had in her bag. Eriri was surprised that Megumi had a key to Tomoya's house. They found Tomoya crying while reading a script on his computer. Tomoya greeted them and explained that Utaha had handed him a new script yesterday, and its story development was very different. Megumi guessed that maybe Utaha had decided the incest part wasn't necessary, but Tomoya said that the incest still remained, and in the new script, the main role didn't go to Megumi, the girlfriend, but to the younger sister from a previous life, Ruri. This meant the female protagonist was changed. In the new script, the forbidden love between the two siblings was explored in more depth. Tomoya asked Megumi, who still had a rational mindset, to read the story that defied common sense. Megumi recited a line from Ruri saying that she loved her older brother Soma deeply and would never give him up to anyone. Tomoya commented that it was a very possessive line from a younger sister. In the script, their happiness doesn't last long because in order to save a world that is on the brink of destruction, the only way to defeat the demons is by using the power within Ruri's body. This power can only be awakened by sacrificing Ruri's memories. Essentially, Soma has to choose between saving the world or saving his sister. Megumi then asks, what's the point of choosing his sister if the world is going to be destroyed anyway? Tomoya asks Megumi not to comment on a parallel world game. He continues reading the script, and the time comes when Soma, in his battle with his arch-nemesis, is unable to sacrifice his younger sister. But because of Ruri's love for Soma, her older brother, she makes the difficult decision on her own to sacrifice herself to save the world, or more precisely, to save her brother. It's a tough decision, but a tragic and right one. Tomoya asks Megumi to read Ruri's line again, where she says that she loves her brother Soma and is happy to be with him. Hearing that, Tomoya bursts into tears, not wanting the story to end that way. Tomoya then asks Megumi and Eriri what they think of the script. Megumi says the story is interesting, she liked the previous script, but the new one is also touching and emotional. Unlike Megumi, Eriri gets upset because Utaha changed everything. She acknowledges that the new script is emotional, but as the person responsible for the visuals, she has her concerns about the changes. Eriri asks if Tomoya is sure about changing the story like this, because it will not only change the script, but also the entire interpretation of their game. The theme will shift as well, and she will have to change the expressions in the dialogue. So even though Megumi might still be the female protagonist on the cover, the new script would make Ruri the protagonist. Eriri says the story is both sad and bittersweet, and the writing style of Yutaka Kasumi, the author of Metronome of Love, is very evident. Tomoya asks if Eriri has read Metronome of Love, but Eriri denies it, claiming she only read reviews online. Tomoya asks Eriri to help decide which script should be included in the game, but Eriri refuses, saying she already has plenty of work as the illustrator and doesn't want to be involved in such an important decision. Tomoya thinks that at Blessing Software, they all think and make decisions together. But Eriri points out that the person who should decide the direction of the game is the producer or the director. She also says that if they're going to discuss this, it should be with the writer. Eriri then asks why Tomoya didn't call her earlier that day. Tomoya explains that Utaha had already finished her task and he had to catch up with his novel deadlines. Eriri asks why Utaha had all day to spend with a guy. Eriri accidentally blurts out that she saw Tomoya and Utaha together yesterday, and Tomoya is surprised, wondering why Eriri was there too. Eriri explains that it was just a coincidence, as she and Megumi were out together. Megumi then tells them both to be quiet as she's playing a game. Tomoya and Eriri walk over to her, surprised that Megumi is playing a game. It turns out that it's a game made by Rincala Works, which is about to be launched at the Winter Art Market. The game's genre is similar to theirs, and their booths might be close to each other. It turns out that the game was created by Rouge and Rouge using characters like Izumi and her older brother.